This webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing soon at www.emeraldashborer.info. You will also find the recordings for all previous EAB University webinars there. Thank you for attending today, and Cliff, please share your screen with your presentation and we can get started.
Okay. Can you see me share my screen? I'm unmuted by host. Okay. All right. It's nice to be here, and I just want to check is that you can see a slide in front of you that says EAB, Basic Biology and Management. Is that correct?
I am not seeing that right now.
Okay. Well, let's just share screen. Oh, I see it. Okay. How about now?
Yeah, starting. There it is.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, all right. Okay, it's always fun to get started on these things here. It's so I can prepare to be functionally talking to myself in my room while actually speaking to all of you who are listening in. So today, I plan to talk about emerald ash borer and review some of the basic biology and its management. And my focus is going to be on how the emerald ash borer attacks trees, and how you can actually emphasize, how you can actually see what an ash tree might be. Let me just see how this works here. Let's see, hold on a second. Okay. All right, it's working now. Sorry, I apologize. Okay, so what you're going to do is I'll talk about the basics about emerald ash borer, about the life cycle, signs and symptoms, insecticide options, and talk a little bit about biological control. And so my focus will be this week will be on the individual trees and how you as an individual can respond. Next week, I'll be back again, but I'll be talking about how people and communities can work together to manage emerald ash borer in their area. And I'll be talking more about the economies of scale and how communities can actually rally themselves towards acting before the trees are too late to rescue. Okay, so why are we even here? Okay, this picture I took in a place called Som Park near Indianapolis soon after emerald ash borer had killed most of the ash trees. And you can see this is a highly manicured golf course. And all the ash trees are beautifully pruned but totally dead. And I like to show this slide because a lot of people will tell me that they think their ash trees are fine because they take good care of their trees, and that the emerald ash borer wouldn't dare kill one of their well-tended trees because they take so much good care of them. But here you can see these trees were really properly maintained, and the ash borer made pretty quick work of them. So, ash trees are fairly common in North America. Not as common as some species, but there are about 7.5 billion ash trees nationally. And most of the native species, are threatened with what we call a functional extinction, meaning that they would just essentially be so greatly reduced that they'd be really hard to find in the forest. And really, to date, it's the most devastating pest in U.S. history. And you see in the lower left part of the slide here, you'll see a neighborhood in Detroit that basically lost all its trees after emerald ash borer killed them. On the picture on the right are trees that have been had the bark peeled off of them by woodpeckers after emerald ash borer came and killed their trees. So there are some specific areas in the United States where emerald ash borer exists, and it's mostly where ash trees exist, and these are the resources that we want to protect. But before I go talking about that further, I want you to be able to recognize what an ash tree is. Ash tree, although it's very common, a lot of people don't know what it is until the tree starts dying in front of them. So here's some identification tips. Probably the most important thing you want to look at is the branching pattern. They have opposite branching, which means that the branches are opposed on both sides of the stem. And that's different from, say, an alternate branching, where the branches appear to be staggered along the stem. So this is one here and one there. They appear to be staggered, and here they're just right on opposite sides of each other. They also have relatively stout twigs, and you can see the opposite branching here. They're not quite as thin as a maple, which also has opposite branching pattern. Ash trees have got compound leaves, and that means that this stem-like structure, which is called a rachis, is actually a whole leaf, and it's got lots of different leaflets, small little leaflets on each one of these things, and there's 5 to 11 per leaf. A maple tree, which also has opposite branches, has a single leaf, and it's not compound like this. So this thing, I see these multiple leaves arranged in groups of 5 to 11 leaflets. That's another characteristic. Probably in the wintertime, the best characteristic is going to be the diamond-shaped pattern in the bark that I'm highlighting over here with my cursor. This is a white ash, and it's done so to a lesser extent on the green ash. But they are very, very distinct on some of the older trees. Another way that I like to identify this is I look for ash flower galls, and that's these little brown balls, and you'll notice them in the wintertime. You notice the ash trees, a lot of them in urban areas have got this ash flower gall. We used to call this a problem when we were worried about when the ash trees didn't have very many other problems, didn't have emerald ash borer yet. But if you see an ash tree, a tree with opposite branching with these brown little pom-poms all over it, that would be another good tip that you have an ash tree. We've got, in Indiana, we've got a couple different species of ash trees, but I know that in many parts of North America, white ash is fairly common, and that tends to be on dry areas, whereas green ash tends to be preferred more in wet areas. We do have a species of ash called blue ash, which is likes upland, but it is fairly resistant to emerald ash borer. But is not very commonly used in urban plantings, although there are some cultivars that are out. Well, what do we use ash trees for? Well, ash trees are as commonly used as shade trees, but in the forested area, they're often used for constructing furniture, tools, and of course baseball bats. It's a very strong wood. It takes impacts like a 90-mile-an-hour baseball being thrown by a pitcher, and it won't split and crack like a maple. So it's a favorite wood for tool handlers. It's also used quite readily for firewood, and as ash trees die, more and more people will be using the ash trees for firewood. But we really want to not encourage the movement of firewood very long distances. Generally speaking, you can move it from the front of the house to your back of the house, but you don't want to take it from your house all the way across the state to a state park, because you might be moving emerald ash borer into a place where it's no longer where it's yet to be found. So where did emerald ash borer come from to begin with? It came from Asia, pretty much in the eastern part of China and near north of North Korea, and it was arrived in Detroit in the early 1990s, but it wasn't really discovered until 2002, until thousands of ash trees had already died in the Detroit area. And now it's already in 33 states, which is pretty impressive. I remember we were just watching. It's only been about since 2002 when it was first discovered. It's only 15 years, and we can see now that a good part of eastern North America has emerald ash borer, and that if you look at the overlay, most of the area where the ash trees are in rural forests are covered, with the exceptions of Alabama and some of the eastern coast states. So some of the West Coast states. Okay, so for the most part, it's pretty much spread and run its course, but there's still some areas, especially the West Coast, that we would like to avoid the movement. So moving ash products across state lines is still illegal, and the restrictions are very important. So if you have an ash tree dying in your house and you cut it up for firewood, please don't take it to Yellowstone Park to on your camping trip. That is exactly how it moves around, and we don't want you to be doing that. Okay, so emerald ash borer is a real big problem for cities, because if you look, you notice that most of the in the urban Midwest, ash trees can be as little as 20% of the urban forest to as much as 80% of the urban forest. I know in the eastern part of the Midwest, I can see many communities that are 20% ash. But when I've been to places like South Dakota and North Dakota, where half the trees in the streets are ash trees, it has a huge impact. And there have been several studies that have shown that in the next 10 years, that'll be it's going to cost somewhere north of $11 billion to manage this insect. And just to give you a feel for things, I know a lot of people might remember the decline of the American elm due to Dutch elm disease. In this graph here, that they lost 200 million trees. We have about 7.5 billion trees at risk. So it's just way off the charts in terms of the relative impact, and it's especially going to be important in the urban forest. The other thing you want to remember is that ash trees have a value. There is a website called the Tree Benefits Calculator. Just Google National Tree Benefit Calculator, and you can put in your zip code, and you put in the size, the diameter of your tree at breast height, and you'd see that your tree actually supplies a certain amount of benefits. For a tree in Indiana, Lafayette, Indiana, a white ash has over $200 per year in value to a homeowner who has this on his house and has his or her house. So about half of it is about a third of the value is $102 is property values. There's electricity benefits. There is natural gas. This is basically heating and cooling. And then there's air quality. And then, of course, there's for the municipality, they save money on storm water runoff. And many cities have to pay for movement of water during storms. And in the middle of this hurricane season, that's you can see where that stormwater can be a big issue. But a 20-inch ash tree can slow down the percolation of 2,500 gallons of stormwater each year. So and if cities have to pay for it, it can really save them some money. All right, let's now talk about the life cycle of this bug that's just causing all this death and devastation. So here we are right now, somewhere close to October, and most of the emerald ash borers are in this J-shaped stage beneath the bark. What's going to happen is that they will develop in early May, make a pupa, and that pupa it's kind of like a cocoon, as you can see here in the tweezers. Okay, and then it will chew its way out. The pupa will then give forth to an adult, which will chew its way out and make this characteristic D-shaped exit hole, and then they will fly out, feed on the leaves. In May and June, they feed on the leaves in order to mature their eggs, and then they will lay eggs on the outside surface of the bark. The eggs will hatch into larvae that will create these classic zigzag galleries, okay, and cause the damage. Now let me just show you. I've got a nice video here of a female. Here she is. She is on the trunk of a tree. If you look at the hind end, you'll see a tongue-like process starting to stick out. Here it is, over here. and the ants are all over the bark of a tree often, and she is going to find a spot to hide her eggs. She's going to this is the ovipositor. She's now stuck it in a little crack and crevice, and she's pumping out and gluing a few eggs onto the little cracks and crevices out of the view of the ants, so that she can hide the eggs until the eggs hatch and start feeding and boring into the tree. And each female can produce lay as many as 80 eggs over the course of their lifetime. They can fly naturally about a half a mile. Okay, so they'd like to stay on the trees where they've been, but they're not. They don't worry about. They can move around quite well. So the adults begin emerging from ash trees in May in this part of the country here, but you can look at growing degree days at base 50, at 450 growing degree days, or if you live in an area where you have black locust trees, which are quite common, when they are in bloom, that is when the adults are flying. Okay, and what we want to now, I want to talk now is about how these larvae actually kill the trees. So the eggs are laid on the bark. They then hatch into larvae which crawl through the bark, chew through the bark, and they'll feed on the cambium and the phloem area over here. And as they molt, as they get bigger and bigger, they will start to etch what we call the sapwood. And ash trees are ring porous, meaning they have just one layer of tubes, which we call xylem, which collect the water from the roots and they bring them up to the leaves. And if that is etched and cut off, the plant will run out of water and the top of the tree will dry out. So emerald ash borer will only attack true ash trees. So mountain ash, which is in the rosaceous family, has these bright red fruit. Those aren't real ash, but really it does kill all the native ash with the exception of blue ash and the very rare white ash tree in the forest. And in the urban forest, since most of the ash trees are actually clones of varieties, all the ash trees that are in urban areas that are planted are going to be killed. And there's unfortunately no real escaping it. And just to give you an idea, the picture on the left you see is an ash tree we found in Steuben County, and you can see how every square inch of that tree was all the phloem was completely consumed, down even onto the root flare. So they're quite thorough and quite devastating. It's almost as if the bark was blown off this tree. Okay, so now that we know how emerald ash borers kill trees by girdling them, I want you to be familiar with some of the signs and symptoms that you see. There's the classic D-shaped exit hole we see on the left, the zigzag galleries, and vertical splits. The vertical splits occur when this part of the tree has been killed and it can no longer lay on new bark. And then as the tree expands on the other side, because the other side isn't necessarily killed, it will pull apart on the bark and cause it to split. So the first things you're probably going to notice would be probably some thinnings up in the upper part of the canopy over here. In the upper part of the canopy. So you can see in this one slide, the top is thin, and then as time goes on, you'll start noticing that the dieback goes further and further and further down the tree, and more of the tree declines. And that's basically because the water can't get from the roots up into the top of the tree. Later on, as the population gets heavier, and especially in the wintertime, you're going to notice an awful lot more woodpecker activity. These birds are amazing. They're really capable of finding emerald ash borer infected trees. We were doing some work a while back, and you see these little these woodpecks over here. They're really very very diagnostic, and on the tree before when you see these white flecks all over the place, that's when you know there's woodpecker activity. You might see them flying. They've got a barbed tongue, and once they they peck a hole, they will stick their barbed tongue, roll it out, and stick it out into the hole, and then they'll sort of hook up that larva and pop it up in their mouth, and they're quite good at it. And they we actually in our research, we actually have to cage the trunk of the trees to keep the woodpeckers from actually eating our data. Well, when the beetles survive, which is in most of the time, they'll produce this real typical S-shaped gallery, and it's often packed with frass or excrement. So you see this. That's why it appears somewhat white. Vertical splitting occurs, okay, because this part is dead, and this side of the tree is dead, and then as the tree grows on the other side and it expands, it basically pulls the bark away, and it causes this vertical split, revealing the zigzag galleries beneath. Ultimately, when the tree has lost an awful lot of its leaves and it's starting to get this last gas, it might produce these new greens called epicormic sprouts. These are sprouting that comes from not the normal growing points, but just the main trunk, and it's the last gasp that the tree tries to make in order to maybe produce some new seeds and possibly reproduce. But once a tree looks like this, that tree is shot. There's not much left to it. The last thing you're going to see are the D-shaped exit hole, and as my colleague Deb McCulloch has often told me, that if you're in a city and you're walking and you see an ash tree with lots of D-shaped exit holes on the trunk at eye level, run away as fast as you can, because that tree is probably dead, and a big branch might fall down on your head. So, when you have a heavily infested tree, you might see lots of holes close together, but clearly these are the D-shaped holes, as you can see. Well, there are some native lookalikes that you can run into, and they do not have D-shaped exit holes. Not every single dying ash tree is dying because of emerald ash borer, although if it is in an area where emerald ash borer is, that's probably the most likely cause. But some trees are just put in the wrong spot. They might not have enough soil to support them. They might be in the wrong planting area, the wrong site. They might have been hit by a lawnmower too many times, or drought. But there are an awful lot number of beetles. There are some longhorn beetles. We see the red-headed ash borer, which is really common, and banded ash, and then the ash privet borers. These are quite common. We see this in the area. And these will also make galleries beneath the bark. But you see, instead of making a zigzag gallery, they'll go down, and then they'll make a right-hand turn, or a right-angle turn, and then they will molt, and then they'll continue feeding. Then they'll molt, and they'll continue feeding, and then eventually they'll go into the heartwood. Okay, the emerald ash borer does not go into the heartwood. Also, the holes are perfectly round. Okay, so that's something that you might get confused with early on. But if you see these right angles, you know it's going to be a longhorn beetle, not emerald ash borer. Then there are clearwing borers, which are moths, which will feed also in the heartwood, and they will feed in the phloem as well. They do not have the right angles, but that they make over there either. But they will also feed on the phloem as well before they go inside. Emerald ash borer have got these bell-shaped segments, and the clearwing borer has actually got real true legs. The emerald ash borer doesn't. And the shape is just completely different. The head is much bigger than the head on the emerald ash borer. You will see these straw-like cocoons sticking out of holes occasionally, and you might see some sawdust at the bottom of the tree as well. Little sawdust will be pitched. It might be collected in the crotch of a tree, or maybe at the base of a tree. Another one you might run into every now and then is a carpenter worm. You can actually stick your finger inside this hole. This is a month. This is a pretty good size caterpillar. You see it's almost 2.5 inches long over here, and they're quite common, but you're not going to be nearly as numerous. Probably something which is going to be more common will be the ash bark beetle. You see lots of little holes coming out, but you'll see these horizontal galleries parallel to the ground when you peel back the bark. And that, even though it has killed the tree, which was attacked due to other stress factors, it is not the emerald ash borer. Okay, so now we know how to identify what an emerald ash borer is. We recognize some of the signs and symptoms. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of bark splitting and wood pecks. I'll talk about some of the insecticide options that you can use and pursue as a homeowner. All of this is summarized on the EAB, on the emeraldashborer.info website, in a bulletin called Insecticide Options for Protecting Ash Trees from Emerald Ash Borer. This last one came out in 2014, and we hope to be producing a new one sometime in the next year or so. And I'll tell you how emerald ash borers are killed by the insecticides. One target is to try to get insecticides in or on the leaf to kill the adult beetle, which has to feed on the leaves in order to mature and lay its eggs. Okay. And a second way is to get it into the cambium by putting it into the soil, so it goes under the roots, and in that way it will kill the larvae that hatch from the eggs. So in summary, there's like 4 different active ingredients. Imidacloprid and dinotefuran are 2 neonicotinoids. Okay. Emamectin benzoate is another product that the 2 neonicotinoids can be either applied into the soil or injected into the tree. Emamectin benzoate can only be injected into the tree, and azadirachtin is a more natural product, which is has to be injected into the tree. None of these products will kill the eggs. All the products will kill the first 2 larval stages, and only emamectin benzoate will kill all 4 larval stages. The emamectin benzoate is the most toxic to the emerald ash borer, while killing an adult that takes only 1 or 2 bites of a leaf, whereas it takes several bites to be killed by dinotefuran, and you need sustained feeding to be killed by imidacloprid. And azadirachtin is not toxic to the adults, but it will reduce the number of eggs that they can lay. Products can be applied in a number of methods. Soil drenches are probably the most common that homeowners can use, but they can only be applied on trees that are up to 20 inches in diameter at breast height. And that means you stand at the base of the tree, and when you're 4.5 feet above the soil line, you measure the diameter, which is the area around the tree, divide by pi or divide by 3, and that gives you a diameter. So you measure the circumference going all the way around, divide by 3.14 if you're being precise, or by 3 for a quick take, and that'll tell you your diameter. So if if it's 60 inches around, you have a 20-inch diameter at breast height tree. So the trunk would be 20 inches from one side to the other side if you put your hands on both sides of the trunk. Professionals can use these soil injectors that can actually inject them around the tree, and you want to inject them all within about a foot or so of the base of the tree. You want to put the application for homeowners pretty much at within a foot of the tree. You know, there's been some confusion for homeowners. A lot of folks are thinking that they want to put it around the edge where they think that's where the fine roots are. That's not the best place. You get your best uptake when you put it right up against the trunk of the tree, so it goes down and gets those roots. For dinotefuran, you can protect trees up to 18 to 20 inches by spraying it directly right on the trunk of the tree. This material gets taken up right through the bark. And then there's a number of injection systems that will allow you to use to put emamectin benzoate. This is one by Arborjet, and this is one by Rainbow. These products can be injected directly into the root flare and taken up into the tree. Now, so how effective are these products? Well, I have a study going on with my students down in Eagle Creek Park in Indianapolis, and we have trees that are pretty large. The tree on the left was not treated. It's, as you can see, it's dead. The tree on the tree on the right was not treated. It's dead. The tree on the left is completely alive. And this is my 6'2" tall student, okay, who is right next to this tree. So this is a 40-inch in diameter tree. So it's 40 inches from one side to the other side. This is a monster tree. It's about 200 years old, and it's been protected. The trees in our studies ranged from 28 inches in diameter to 62 inches. So that's about from 2 to 5 feet wide. And there were 10 trees that were treated in the fall with this emamectin benzoate and a product called Triage. In 2013, this is what you would get a professional to do for you. And then it was treated again in 2016. And what we can see here is that when we applied them in the spring, because this was, we already started out with some thinning, some of the canopy was already starting to get lost from emerald ash borer when we got started. We were able to hold the injury to less than 20% canopy thinning, and now it's starting to level off in 2017 when we applied in the spring. When we applied in the fall, in other words, we let the trees be fed on for a whole nother summer before we applied the product in September. We started seeing actually more injury, because I think that was actually what was consumed in that summer, and now we're seeing the thinning going down due to breakage and the like. The untreated trees, this line up over here, are completely dead. There is not a leaf left on those trees. So what this tells us is that you can actually hire a contractor to treat your trees once every 3 years, and you can keep your trees alive. And that's really good news, because and you can actually, even if the trees are already starting to show some signs of damage, you could actually start curing the tree. Now, a lot of folks are saying, well, why bother even treating the tree? Why keep it alive? You know, then I'll just have to take down a bigger tree. Well, this summer I went up to Fort Wayne, which has lost 14,000 ash trees for emerald ash borer on the city streets alone. They decided in 2008 to protect a bunch of trees on Clinton Street. And here we see a beautiful tree-lined street that I took this picture in July of 2017. And these trees are thriving 11 years after emerald ash borer was found and after all the trees were removed. So this is really good evidence to suggest that if you protect your trees, they will still be in pretty good shape. And the most important take-home message here is that all the treatments are systemic. They work best before the trees are infested, although emamectin benzoate can be somewhat helpful and contain it. But the earlier you get in to do the treatment, the better. So what you want to do is think about which trees can actually treat. If you look, you see here, I have an app called the Purdue Plant Doctor. Where in there I got some photos of some trees that are to look at the range of candidacy. The tree on the left has about 10% thinning. You'll have excellent results if you treat it with either a soil treatment or an injection. This one here, there's a fair chance of protecting it because there's still a tree left, but you want to call an arborist in here to see if this tree is worth saving. This tree, which has lost half its canopy, is essentially just too far gone to allow to be saved. This app we have available at PurduePlantDoctor.com will allow you to get some basic information about the biology of emerald ash borer and compare what you see with different photos of injury in order to see whether or not that tree could actually be saved. Okay, so all right. So and I think it's good to have these sorts of pictures in lots of times your judgment on a tree is clouded by whether or not you like that tree or you just want to save that tree because of its sentimental value. But you really don't want to invest your money in a tree that looks like this, because this tree really can't be saved. This is 70% canopy thin. There's only about a third of the tree left. This stuff here is just this epicormic sprouts, hardly even fits into the equation of what is actually part of the canopy. All right, now, a lot of people have been concerned about, have asked me questions about biological control. They read about this in the newspaper. They hear that the state is releasing wasps to control emerald ash borer. Can I get some to protect my tree? Well, I think it'd be good for you as a homeowner to be thinking about this in the context of what biological control really is. And it's simply the use of living organisms to kill another living organism, and in this case, the emerald ash borer. Now, basically what we try to do is we try to take the natural enemies, or these parasites which live to feed on emerald ash borer in Asia, and we want to take them from Asia to North America. So a good friend of mine used to say that the biological control is sort of the reuniting of old enemies. We're trying to bring so in 2003, some scientists went to China to search for natural enemies, and they found a couple of species of wasps. And the idea is if we can introduce these organisms, we can take the population of emerald ash borer, which it runs very high, and knock it back lower after they've established, and hopefully below the point where they can cause some damage. And I think that from the standpoint of what we're trying to do, I think that it's very unlikely that emerald ash borer is going to be that emerald ash borer will be killed in time to save existing ash trees. In other words, the old growth forest, the large ash trees in front of your house, the large ash trees in your cities, these will not be protected by these parasites. These parasites are actually going to be used to protect the seedlings that come from the trees that die, and keeps them alive long enough so that they can reproduce. And there's a couple of different species, a couple types of natural enemies. There are parasitoids, which is, we call these wasps. This is this parasitoid in the genus Attanocolus that happens to be native, that drills down deep into the trunk and will attack a larvae that's just beneath the bark. And then there are beetles other predators that will directly consume the emerald ash borer. And then there are pathogens or fungi. Basically, you give the emerald ash borer a fatal case of athlete's foot or athlete's tarsa, if you know the jargon, and it will and it kills them. But the natural enemies that have been released are mostly from the USDA are mostly parasitoids. We have released a bunch of these things, and I do remember one time I was in Fort Wayne, and I was releasing a bunch of parasitoids in front of the Fort Wayne's Children's Zoo, and when I got there, I was swamped by a bunch of reporters who wanted to know what the heck I was doing, releasing 20,000 wasps in front of all these children. Was I out of my mind? And I told them, well, I actually opened up I had this technical device which we call a beer cup that was filled with these parasitic wasps, and I showed them these evil creatures. And you can see these insects, these pointy devices, these are actually egg-laying devices. They can't sting humans. I basically stuck my hand inside there and showed them that they can't really sting me, that they can't sting me at all. And that way they were not going to harm kids. So when you hear about them releasing wasps, don't worry about getting stung, because they can't sting you. They only drill holes into trunks of trees and lay eggs inside of emerald ash borers. These are some of the three wasps. This happens to be in the genus Spathius with a very long ovipositor, so it can actually get into thicker bark trees. This is in the genus Tetrasticus. It has a shorter ovipositor, and these here are just egg parasites. And this is a close-up of the egg parasite, Obius ogrilli. Each female can kill up to 62 emerald ash borer eggs, and the larvae, so it can lay. It has multiple generations over the course of a season. It comes out pretty much when it warms up in the springtime, so it can attack all the eggs that are plastered to these cracks and crevices of the bark. And it's quite compatible with insecticides, because the trees that are treated with insecticides do not get the insecticide on the outside of the bark; they're just on the inside, so that this won't interfere with this. And there's at least 2 generations a year. There's another one, Spathis agrilli, which tends to be good for the southern part of the emerald ash borer range, and each wasp can lay up to 20 eggs on a larva. This one was just introduced about a year or so ago into North America, and each wasp can lay up to 94 eggs. It is adapted more to the northern range. One of the things we found, the researchers have been finding, is that these wasps, that some wasps do better in different parts of the country. So in the southern range, where emerald ash borer is, the Spathius, the first Spathius species, agrilli, will work, and this one is more to the northern part of the range. But basically, we're pretty excited because this one's got a very, very long ovipositor and could drill into bigger trees and protect them for a longer period of time. This one, Tetrascus planopennici, was introduced in the first wave, and it's quite successful. It moves several miles a year. It has 4 generations a year, and each egg that's laid will produce lots and lots of larvae. So you can have one larva can produce up to 120, 130 wasps. So it's has a great reproductive potential, and it's very, very important for the biocontrol. So basically, it's more of a long-term management tool. So at this point, I sort of want to sum up that I've got that at Emerald Ash at EAB University, the same place where you are today. You can actually look for some more information to get more about what I've talked about today. Last spring, I gave a talk about chemical control, what doesn't work and why, on February 21st. In November 12th, 2015, Roy Van Driesch gave a great summary about biological control, putting it all in perspective, that shows in a lot more detail what I was trying to say briefly about the potential for biocontrol. Bob Schutzke from Michigan State last fall gave a really nice seminar on the kinds of trees that you could use to replace ash, because ultimately, you're thinking if you do not want to remove your ash, if you don't want to protect your ash trees, you have to plan to remove that ash tree, and he gives a nice list of trees that you could use that work pretty well. There's also some information about how you can diversify your forest by John Ball, and then I have a talk where I talk about community forestry responses for emerald ash borer. So at this point, I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, Cliff, we did have one person that was that did want to know. Maybe you could go back to this.
Of course.
How do you know when a tree is too far gone to treat with chemicals?
Okay.
Just kind of kind of a refresher there, if that's possible.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so what you want to think of is you want to have a vision of the canopy. I'm going to try and get this here if I can go as fast as I can. So you want to have a thought of a canopy. Think of your tree as a lollipop, okay? And so here we have a tree over here. And so imagine this tree, this entire tree, if it was completely filled with leaves, all right? It's like a big piece, a big pie. And you take a wedge out of it like this, okay? And you ask yourself, what proportion of that is missing from there? So in this case, I would say from this whole circle here, I would say about a quarter of that, close to a quarter, maybe 20%, 1/5 of that is missing. So I would call this 20%, maybe even 30% canopy thinning, all right? And so when you get much more beyond this much being lost, it's hard to imagine what that tree would look like without it. So if you lop this piece off right here, this tree has no leader, no growing point, and is essentially gone. Let me go further down, and I'll show you. If I go back to that app, just trying to get there faster here. Let's see if I just get it like this. Maybe I'll go fast. 1 second. There we go. That's it. Okay. That's better. Okay. So right over here. So here in this tree here, you know, the dead part. So what you have to realize with emerald ash borer is that trees don't drop their leaves. Trees have their branches infested with borers, and the branches become too sick or too weak to push out new leaves. And the fate of those branches will eventually die, and they're going to have to be cut off. So you're going to have to envision that tree without it. So here we see a tree where there's a little bit of thinning around here, some thinning over here. Imagine this tree without this without this part over here, and maybe a couple of branches, you know, missing over here. But you can actually see this tree actually still being alive. You can grow into something that might be worth looking at. This tree, if you cut this part right off, there's not much left. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Cliff. I am not seeing, oh, so have the parasitic wasps survived well in Indiana, and have you seen them begin to be effective?
The parasitic wasps have survived well. We've recovered Oobius, the egg parasite. We've recovered Tetrasticus. We did not cover Spathius, the first Spathius species, Spathius agrilli. Spathius gallinae has been released, and I do believe that it has been recovered. I'm not sure. I know that they were looking for it this year, but we do know that it is able to survive. I know it's been able to survive in Michigan, so it certainly should be able to survive here. So, and in terms of what that means for the forest, I have recovered them on small saplings. I've recovered emerald ash borer with parasites in them on small ash trees. So I think that, you know, ultimately it's going to save the regrowth forest. There's a long-term study that's been going on in Michigan and also in Maryland that have been looking at these things, and they're actually seeing that as you have wasps with longer and longer ovipositors, we're able to have the trees survive for longer and longer periods of time. So I don't know, and I think that's the big question. We don't know whether or not we'll ever be able to have trees, ash trees, which are 5 feet wide again, but we may have them be able to survive until they're 1, maybe 2 feet in diameter before they're killed by the emerald ash borer. And that opens the possibility. So when you have trees that are that wide in diameter in trunk diameters, they're able to provide seed for wildlife. They're able to serve their ecosystem function, where they actually will filter water that, you know, in riparian areas. So water that is filtered before it gets into the riverbed, so it can keep the water clean, and the like. So there'll be some, and they may actually be able to be used for some sort of timber. But you know, so I think I'm very hopeful and optimistic about biological control in combination with the proliferation of some resistant white ash and other work that's being done on host plant resistance.
Okay, I have a couple people who have raised their hands. I need, if you do have a question, could you please type it into the chat pod? We don't have, we're not able to give you audio participation, so we kind of need you, if you have a question, to please type it into the chat pod. We'd be glad to answer your questions. And anyone else who has questions, make sure that you type them into the chat pod, and we will get those answered by Dr. Sadof.
Okay. Date. Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking for other stuff.
Oh, okay. Here we go. What about the use? Oh, I think they're looking at, Nina is asking about neonicotinoids and the pollinators.
That's a great question. And, you know, there has been some work that's been done by Dave Reed, his name Dave Reed, from Ohio State. And he is actually going to be giving a webinar in 2 weeks from today. And he'll be giving a webinar at Purdue University, and he will show his latest research. A few years ago, when he did his work on this, he found that if the only pollen that is available to feed for bees is ash pollen that's been treated with insecticides, it will kill the bees. But ash trees are wind pollinated, and at the time when the pollen is out, there are often other resources that are available. So you have to think of it like this: if you are a pollinator, you're a bee, and you're foraging for pollen and nectar resources, you're going to be using ash trees if it just as a pollen source only, and you are also only you look for the ash pollen at a time when there's other pollen that's out there. So unless it's the major source of pollen near a bee colony, then it's probably not going to affect them. Okay, you may kill a few bees that feed on them, but they may die before they get back to the hive and train all the other bees to go back to that pollen source. So I'm really looking forward to his talk to see what his latest research is, and he can speak with much more authority than I can on that.
Okay. We have a question: where and when were wasp parasitoids released in Ohio? I live in the northwest part of the state.
Well, there is a website called mapbiocontrol.com, mapbiocontrol.com, and that will you open that up and it will tell you when and where emerald ash borer parasitoids were released. I know that we started releasing them around 2009, 2010, and I know that the whole Midwest has been actively participating in this project. So they've been released now for maybe up to 10 years at this point in time. Actually, close to 10 years for the first three, and the Spathius gallinae with a long ovipositor was just released officially, I think, this summer.
Okay, I think you can answer this question. Emerald ash borer was just discovered in my county in Green Lake, Wisconsin. Whose responsibility is it to come up with a community approach to saving our ash trees? Are there good models to follow from other counties?
Okay, tune in next week, okay, for the detailed treatment. But I'll just give you a thumbnail sketch on this one over here. You are responsible, actually, probably, so who's responsible if it's in your county? Actually, the responsibility lies within the community and how that works. Some communities have got city arborists who take care of the trees inside the cities. Some cities do not have a dedicated city arborist. Okay, so in that case, there's a different system. But you, as a member of your community, should contact folks to find out at least who's in charge, at least in an urban area. But if you live in a neighborhood, what you might want to do is start talking to your neighbors about emerald ash borer and find out how much you have to be concerned about it. Probably the most important thing that you can do is to take an inventory of your trees. So if you go into your community and you survey all the trees and you find out that only 1 out of every 50 trees is an ash tree, you got a really small problem. Okay, it's not that big of a deal. But if you have 1 out of every 3 street trees or trees in your community is an ash tree, that means a third of your trees are susceptible. And if that's the case, then you have a big problem, and you have to go in, start moving early, because there's only 8 years from the time the first tree starts to being hit until all the trees are dead. And really, you can only really act until maybe year 5 or 6 of that cycle, and expect to have anything. So when you start noticing that trees are starting to die, show them to your neighbors, show them to your community to let them know that it's here. show pictures from the Purdue Plant Doctor app so you can see exactly how bad it's going, how bad it will actually be, and try to get them concerned about it and get the resources available before the majority of your trees are damaged beyond the point of saving. And I'll talk all about details about that next week.
Thanks, Cliff. Let's see. It says, did you say atrazine application made to trees by injection only?
No,
as a
Azadirachtin. Okay.
As a Azadirachtin. I'm sorry, I read that wrong. I'm sorry.
Atrazine is a really good herbicide. Okay, and that if you inject that in your trees, that'll kill it like the night follows the day.
Sorry about that. I missed.
But Azadirachtin works very well when it is, and if you look at that webinar that I have on chemical control of emerald ash borer, what works and why, it works really well on trees that are treated before they show symptoms. So if you just found this county in Wisconsin, just found emerald ash borer, it was just first found, now's the time to go with the Azadirachtin. If you start noticing that some of the trees are showing symptoms in your community, it's probably going to be too late for that. Okay. It's a little bit more expensive, but it is OMRI certified, so it's organic approved. So folks who do not want to use, who only want to use organic chemicals can actually use this product without compromising themselves. So the stuff can indeed work. And I put a lot of the details about that in chemical control, what works and why, which I showed at the end of the presentation here. And I think I gave that in sometime in February, I think it was, of last year. Yeah, there it is. It's a chemical control, what works and why, in February of last year. So you can actually watch the whole thing on YouTube to get more information about that. I'll only touch about that briefly next time.
All right. A quick comment. Do you have to register to see maps on Map Biocontrol? You can't just go there and view maps right away.
Maybe so. If that's the case, there must be information there about how to get on there. I haven't done it. I mean, I have access to it, so haven't thought about it. So, but the question is, why do you really want? I mean, why would you want to know about that? I mean, I guess if I'm going to just throw caution to the wind, and I will do a Google search and see what happens when I just.
He says you can register on the site. It said
you can register on the site. Okay, great. Then you can register on then register away on the site, and then you can see what's going on here. Yeah.
Okay, it is noon, and it looks like we have answered all the questions. I want to let you all know that I'm really happy that we've had such a good group and that we've got these questions and people are interested. We will be having another webinar next week on September 26th. And, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry, it's the 28th.
28th, yeah.
It was September 28th. And I would hope that you all will come back and be part of that as well. And again, this is being recorded, and if you have folks that wanted to see this and were not able to participate this morning, it will be on the emeraldashborer.info website pretty quickly. And I want to thank everyone again, and especially our presenter, Cliff Sadof. It was great to have you on here, Cliff, and give us all that great information. So.
Okay, well, it's always nice talking to myself with all these cyber witnesses. Okay.
All right, and with that, I will be closing down the meeting. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Robin. Bye-bye.